Hello to our friends in Kansas City. My name is Philip Rulo with Rultract, and what I'm going to do is walk you through the cleaning and sterilization process of the equipment that you just received from Rultract for an upcoming case. The first thing that we're going to want to do is to disassemble our Rultract Ratchet Rake assembly. Now this piece of equipment here has to be disassembled into 5 pieces for the cleaning process and then reassembled again to look like this for sterilization and use by the OR. So what we're going to do is disassemble this into 5 separate pieces. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to remove your rake plate from your snap clip. Now your rake plate may not be attached to your snap clip, so obviously if it isn't, you don't have to do this. But the first step would be to remove your rake plate from the snap clip. And go ahead and set that rake plate aside and be aware those rake tips are very sharp. Next, we're going to pull the cable from the spool. Now I say pull the cable from the spool and not unwind the cable, because you don't want to use this handle to unwind the cable to remove it from the spool, because it can get kinked inside the spool. So we're going to pull the cable down out of the spool. Very important here that you hold this piece of equipment by the spool. If you put your hand over this handle, try to pull the cable out, this handle will not be able to turn or rotate, and the cable can't be removed from the spool. So go ahead and hold it just like I am here and try to pull your cable out. If the cable doesn't come out, just flip your reversing ratchet lever to the opposite side. Again, making sure you're holding the spool. Now you can go ahead and pull that cable right out. A fully exposed cable is about 16 inches, so that's when you know you've got all the cable out of the spool. Next, we're going to remove the spool cap nut. Now to do that, you're going to reverse your grip and hold this ratchet assembly by the handle. Go ahead and grab your spool cap nut, and without using a tool, just use your hand, turn it counterclockwise all the way until it comes off. Next, we're going to remove the spool cap assembly from the crank handle and gearbox. And to do that, just go ahead and grab your spool cap assembly, slide it right off. Next, you're going to remove your crank handle from your gearbox, and to do that, you just simply pull it out. Now make sure that you note that you removed it from the square hole. So when you go to reassemble it, you make sure you put it into the square hole. Don't put it into the round hole. Next, you're going to separate your spool cap from your spool. And to do that, you go ahead and grab your spool and just pull the spool cap off. Now these 3 pieces here require no further disassembly for cleaning or sterilization. Your Rultract ratchet rake assembly is now disassembled into the 5 pieces. Now it's important to note here that no further disassembly is required of any of these pieces for cleaning and sterilization. So the next thing that we're going to want to do prior to putting the equipment through the cleaning process is make sure that your lock knobs are not opened or closed all the way. You want it to be somewhere right in the middle so that it has some play in it. If it's closed or open all the way, it could seize in that position as a result of the heat of cleaning and sterilization. So you're going to want to take your rotating extender bar prior to putting it through the cleaning cycle. Make sure that this lock knob is not opened or closed all the way. You want it somewhere right in the middle. And note once again that these knobs are not supposed to be removed, so do not remove these knobs. Next, prior to putting it through for the cleaning cycle, make sure that there's some separation between these teeth. We don't want it to be locked into position for cleaning or sterilization. So go ahead and have that somewhere right in the middle so that it freely rotates. Next, on your clamp, We're going to want to make sure that these clamp jaws are not closed all the way or opened all the way. So just have them somewhere right in the middle and allow the knob to have some play in it for the same reason. We don't want the heat to seize this knob into position. So with this handle, make sure that it's not opened or closed all the way, just somewhere in the middle. Each one of your restertotomy attachments, you're going to want to do the same thing. Make sure that these rakes are somewhere right in the middle, not all the way opened or all the way closed. And you'll want to do that for each one of the 4. Now the equipment is ready to be put through the cleaning process. Following the completion of the cleaning cycle, we are now ready to reassemble the Rultract ratchet rake assembly, check the position of all knobs, and check the tightness of all fasteners and screws prior to sterilization. The first thing that you're going to want to do is to check the screws in your crank handle using your large Allen wrench. Next, using a flathead screwdriver, check your ratchet cover plate screws. Then, using a flathead screwdriver, check your cable access plate screw. Go ahead and make sure that that's tight, and then run your finger over it to make sure that it sits flush. Next, you're going to use your small Allen wrench to check your cable set screw. You don't have to over tighten this, just make sure that it's tight and secure. Now you're going to take your large Allen wrench and check your rake clamp screws. Now there are 4 rake clamp screws in the rake plates, and there are 4 rake clamp screws in each one of the restertotomy retractors. So use your large Allen wrench to make sure those are tight. Also on the restertotomy retractor, you'll want to turn it over, take your small Allen wrench, and check both of these screws for tightness as well. Do that for all 4 of the restertotomy retractors. Then you'll want to check the tightness of the screws that hold your clamp handles on. And then the screw that holds the knob on your rotating extender bar. After you have checked for tightness in all of the screws and fasteners, we are going to check positions of the knobs. So prior to sterilization, make sure that this lock knob is not closed all the way or opened all the way. You want it somewhere in the middle. Same thing with the lock knob on the rotating extender bar. Make sure that it's somewhere in the middle, not opened or closed all the way. You want to make sure that these teeth are separated and move freely. You don't want your jaws to be opened or closed all the way. Have them somewhere right in the middle. With this handle, just make sure that it moves freely and it's somewhere in between open and closed all the way as well. Now we are ready to reassemble your Rultract ratchet rake assembly for sterilization and use. Now the first thing that we're going to do is put the crank handle back into the gearbox. Now if you remember, when we disassembled it, we removed it from a square hole. So we want to make sure that we're inserting it back into the square hole and not the round hole. So go ahead and put your crank handle into your gearbox. Make sure that it sits flush. Next, we're going to reassemble the 3 pieces of the spool cap assembly. So you'll want to be sure to note that there's a flat surface on this spool. Let the cable hang over the flat surface. Then you're going to align your cable guide, which is a groove that's cut into the spool cap, with that flat surface and the cable. So these 3 pieces go together with the flat surface, the cable, and the cable guide lined up. Then they go together very easily. If they're not lined up properly, they won't go together easily. So make sure the cable's hanging over the flat surface The cable guide is lined up with the flat surface, and go ahead and put them together. Next, we're going to put the spool cap assembly onto the gearbox and crank handle. Now you'll see there's a groove cut into the gearbox. There's a pin on the spool cap. We want to make sure that that pin is inserted into the groove. That's very important. So go ahead and manipulate your spool cap assembly onto your crank handle and insert that pin into the groove. Next, we're going to put the spool cap nut back on. So you want to make sure that you're holding your ratchet assembly by the handle, because if you're not, when you're trying to tighten your spool cap nut, the handle's going to turn. So hold it like this. Go ahead and put your spool cap nut on by turning it clockwise. You don't want to use a tool, just hand tighten it as tight as you can get it. So now your ratchet assembly has been completely reassembled, and we are ready to wind the cable into the spool. Now, in order to properly wind your cable into the spool, you should attach your rake plate or one of your resternotomy retractors to the snap clip. When there's weight hanging off the snap clip, it allows the cable to wind uniformly in the spool. But the key here is to not only attach one of the rake plates, but also to be sure that you hold your ratchet assembly high enough in the air so that the rake plate is suspended off of the table. You don't want to have the rake plate sitting on the table and then wind your cable into the spool, because the cable will kink in the spool. So attach your rake plate to the snap clip, hold your ratchet assembly up, and then wind the cable into the spool. And I like to leave about 2.5 to 3 inches of cable exposed. Then I remove the rake plate, because the surgeon doesn't always want to have this rake plate on when the retractor is put into place in the OR. So now your Rultract ratchet, rake assembly, and retractor set is ready for sterilization and use.